Hi everyone, I'm Katie.
And I'm Amanda.
And welcome to this episode of Emergency Cooking. I'm really happy that you could join me, and I'm really happy that you could join me as well.
I'm just here for the food.
It's so true. Alrighty, so this week we're really lucky. We've got Amanda talking to us about all things sepsis. This episode is I'm gonna let you know about sepsis. Amanda, what is the big deal about sepsis? Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's worried about it. Nobody can find it sometimes. What is the big deal about sepsis?
Well, it's like Where's Wally, really. You think you've found him, but no. It's that girl in the pinstripe pyjamas again. It's not. It's not Where's Wally at all. So, really the thing about sepsis is it's sneaky. So, those that... It is.
I'm very, very
It's
sneaky.
exactly what it is. I think we're learning a lot more about it. So we're starting to scratch the surface and we're actually starting to call it for what it is, which is sepsis. So everyone knows about Nana Joyce, that's 90, that died from blood poisoning.
Oh.
So from a community perspective, people died from blood poisoning back in the era. But chances are that blood poisoning was actually sepsis. So until we start to use the correct terminology around it, people didn't know what it was. Unfortunately, sepsis starts in the community for the majority of cases. There's less amounts that are hospital acquired and more that are actually acquired in the community. But unless the community know what sepsis is and know how the symptoms and signs manifest and what to look for, they won't present to hospital early. So then health clinicians have the staring down the barrel of septic shock, where it's really hard to come back from septic shock once the body is in that state. Why we're also hearing about it a little bit more is coding practices are changing. So we're realising...
Do you mean hospital coding? So when I'm diagnosing somebody as a nurse practitioner candidate, when I put a diagnosis code in, what I put in actually really matters?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Make sure you get that right, otherwise funding is going to disappear again.
Okay.
But that's a really valid point. So, for example, people in ICUs, for example, die of pneumonia, okay? Now, a lot of the time, that pneumonia is complicated by sepsis.
Oh, okay.
So they have pneumonia, absolutely. That is absolutely what has assisted in that is the infection where they have died. However, they actually probably had septic shock and multi-organ failure. They died from the multi-organ failure, but that pneumonia was the original source.
Right.
So coding a lot of the time may have a cause of death of pneumonia.
Or infection of unknown origin or...
Where sepsis actually was not mentioned at all. So unfortunately we had this, period of time where we didn't really think it was all that common. And for paediatrics specifically, a global burden of disease report was released in January, February this year that identified children and adolescents made up over 40% of cases globally of sepsis. So we thought that children really weren't impacted that much, and it was happening in the elderly, it was happening with people with cancers, people that are immunosuppressed. All these people were pretty good at recognising because of high risk factors. Whereas children, we thought, it doesn't really affect them, it's way more important in the adult population. But those figures are actually saying that they flipped the tables a little bit on that.
Shocking.
I could talk for hours.
She probably will. Every day. Now, Amanda, do you want to have a chat with the people and tell them why it is you know so much about sepsis and what even is your role in sepsis?
I'm still figuring out my role in sepsis. It changes every week.
But while you do that, I'm going to duck off and cook you an omelette.
Oh, I thought you'd never ask. Finally. My, interest in sepsis happened from being an emergency nurse for many years. I got involved in a research study because I felt I needed a little bit of a different challenge, and I wanted to see what went on behind the scenes and how evidence-based practice developed. I was very fortunate enough to work with a fantastic consultant who is still a mentor of mine that really looked at restricted fluid and early inotropes in adult sepsis. So from looking through and being a part of a big RCT, I obviously I was responsible for a lot of data collection. Looking through data, I started to ask a few questions, and I got quite curious about, well, what role do nurses play in this? Sepsis literature is all about, well, not all, but there's a lot of literature about time zero and the management and sepsis 6 and the key early goal-directed therapy. But all that really hinges on when the medical officer has decided the patient has sepsis and we have an hour or 3 hours to get that treatment in. But what happens in the early phases is a question that I ask myself. Sure, people do appear in emergency departments and have septic shock, and they're the real easy ones to recognise because they're critically unwell and it's very obvious. But those ones in the early stages, or the ones that we're not sure if it's sepsis, we think it's an infection, but we're going to hold on to them anyway, let's just watch and wait, end up in a lot of the times in our short stay units or in the wards. Now, nurses are around the patients a lot of the time. So we're the ones who can see subtle differences, and it can be really subtle, and that's where the difficulty in recognition lies. And I thought we really could investigate this and see, how do nurses recognise sepsis? I was lucky to have a little bit of money through the mentor I had, and he advocated that I could do some interviews and do a bit of a qualitative study on nurses' ability to recognise sepsis in the emergency department. Found that very interesting, and from there an opportunity arose up in Brisbane for a statewide coordinator to implement a paediatric sepsis pathway through the state of Queensland. I thought, I've got no chance in this. I'm a Gold Coast nurse from a mixed department. I am not a paediatric specialist, but let's throw my hat in the ring and give it a go. Must have said something right, because I got that job, and 2.5 years later we've designed, created, and we're in the process now of evaluating a paediatric sepsis pathway in 15 HHSs throughout Queensland, and we're evaluating at the moment and drafting some manuscripts to publish our results. Phase 2, however, again, the country and the state is starting to see how important sepsis is, and that we do need to know a little bit more about the recognition and management. So we got a little bit more money to take the project into the next phase, which is the inpatient phase, and rural and remote facilities again throughout Queensland. So my role now has jumped into inpatient space while still evaluating the ED and looking at the lessons learned from that phase to really start to get this happening in ward settings. For me, it's about empowering nurses. It's about being able to realise that it is sneaky and it's not easy, and it's very good in hindsight to go, oh, look at that patient, they're obviously deteriorating, but we know we've got multiple cognitive loads when we're caring for patients, and we know that nothing is as it seems. So that's been really good to actually investigate and look into. And we're building it into community awareness as well. So parents have the ability to recognise sepsis and know if something's wrong with their child.
Alright. So what we're going to do is try the omelette, and then I'm going to increase the flavour sensation.
Okay.
You're going to be a bit weirded out by what I do.
My answers aren't going to matter anymore. I'm food focused. This is what I'm here for.
Just for a change.
That's pretty good.
Alright. Are you ready? Now, don't want you to freak out. It's like a soy dipping sauce from Thailand.
Don't make it sound fancy. It's magic. How fancy can it be?
Alrighty. So what you do is put a little bit on your omelette.
Oh, wow.
It takes it to the next level, doesn't it?
How was that possible?
Telling you. Tricks of the trade, people. Tricks of the trade.
I'm going to let you know about soy.
Alright. We are going to pick up where we left off. So I noticed that you were talking about parental concern. I've heard this so much lately, that we need to be worried about parental concern, that we need to listen to parental concern. Can you tell me, what is parental concern?
So parental concern really is not just as you would think, someone's brought their child to the emergency department, of course they're concerned. That's correct. But parental concern in light of sepsis and paediatric sepsis, and really does cross over to a lot of paediatric illnesses, is where the parent says something is different about this illness. So if you further delve into that and say, has your child been unwell before? Most children have been unwell before with fevers and snotty noses and urties, and that's what happens with children running around playing with each other. But they will be able to identify sometimes that something is different, that they have a gut feeling that something's not right, and they just say this is not how the child has normally acted when being unwell in the past.
Right, okay.
So it's those sorts, and of course it varies in the way they will say it, but if those things are coming forth in triage presentations or when you're looking after a child, they really warrant a further investigation into that. We learn through university in the short span of education about PEDS that we get, that parents know their child best and parents are the expert of their child, and that couldn't ring more true with recognition for sepsis.
So as always, we like evidence-based practice. I was wondering, is there any research out there that the nurses or the clinicians that are watching this can have a look at in regards to parental concern?
So there is a little bit of literature out there about parental concern and parents as the expert of their child in general. In relation to infection and serious bacterial infection or sepsis, there's not a lot. So what there is there's been a couple of systematic reviews. There was a review that we did last year, but there's really only one study that looked at diagnostic performance of parental concern with diagnosing sepsis, which had some interesting results. So that's a study from Vanderbilt in Europe. We are actually, though, doing a study looking at parental concern levels in line with doctors and with nurses with children coming to the emergency department that are screened on the sepsis pathway so that sepsis could be possible, or having some blood sampling done, because we just want to know a little bit more about the role they play and reasons why they've brought their child to hospital.
Okay. So I've heard you say the word sepsis pathway quite a bit during your talking here. Now this video hopefully will go out to the entire world of clinicians. Please like and share.
Aim high.
Aim high. I want to say I want to go viral, but it's not really the time to go viral in a pandemic, is it?
No.
But we would like this to be shared far and wide. So could you explain, because I know that there's some places that do have a sepsis pathway and some places that don't. Could you explain exactly what is a sepsis pathway?
Have you been talking to my PhD supervisors? Because this caused me quite a lot of angst in writing a confirmation document. Because you'll hear sepsis pathways, sepsis guidelines, sepsis protocols, bundles of care. You can call it, there's a few different ways in what you can call it. But a pathway for us, and that we've developed, is something that acts as a cognitive aid and a clinical aid to help guide with judgment, with clinician judgment, and to streamline care so that a child in Mackay receives exactly the same treatment as a child at the Gold Coast.
Okay.
Obviously taking into account that every patient needs individual tailored care, but it's to streamline things and takes the guessing out of, what antibiotic do I give? How much do I give it? So our pathway has prescribing guidelines to match with the source of infection. The front of it is a screening tool to, again, when you go, I don't think something's right with this child, but I'm not quite sure what it is. We know our early warning tools are not sepsis specific, so children can go unnoticed because they're not related, they're not specific to sepsis.
Mm-hmm.
So it combines a screening component to assist.
Yep.
It also helps junior clinicians and junior nurses with empowerment and escalation and empowerment to go up to the doctor and say, look, I'm not sure about this child. They're not really flagging very high on an early warning tool, but they do have parental concern and they are tachycardic. Can you please review them? And that then launches into the management bundle, which you would be familiar with your antibiotic delivery, your cultures, you're taking lactate.
And do you have a tool that's available? So say I'm a parent and I've brought my child in, they've got an ERTI, they've been diagnosed with an ERTI, and we're going home because I'm a sensible parent and I will bring them back if I'm further concerned. Do you have something that you give the parent in order to flag when to bring them back?
Yeah, absolutely. So going through a lot of sentinel events that have happened, a key theme that's emerged is, again, lack of community awareness of sepsis, and that they were discharged from hospital, departments, EDs, and felt that was okay to then not come back when things had changed. But it wasn't that someone discharged the child with sepsis, it was just that it was too early in the trajectory of the illness to declare itself.
Yep.
So absolutely, you could have an ERTI, you could have something that, we know sepsis can be viral, that you've gone home, but parents need to know that it's okay to come back. They need to know that when something changes, if something changes, that it wasn't sepsis a day ago, but it's sepsis now, and you need to come back. So we've developed a safety netting tool which defines some key criteria and some red flags. Of course, there's no combination or no gold standard for diagnosis, but things that should prompt a review and things that we want parents to feel absolutely okay about coming back to the emergency department with that sheet of paper explaining the story and saying, this is what's changed for my child. And of course, now as clinicians, we will listen to parents even more with those key things and go, right, something has changed. This child needs some further investigation and perhaps some blood sampling and close observation.
Great.
If you can get it early, you can decrease the chances of a poor outcome.
Wow, that is a lot to take in. Now, the good news is that this is part 1 of sepsis because it's Amanda and she likes to talk.
I'll be back.
So this was the recognition component of sepsis, and Amanda will be joining us for the management component, which will be a little bit more detailed on what to do when you've actually diagnosed sepsis and what's going on in evidence-based practice around that at the moment. So Amanda, I'd like to thank you.
Will you cut me off for the second one? I've been culled for this one.
She can talk. This video actually went for 54 minutes. So I'd really like to thank you for putting aside time. We're all about empowering nurses, and please join us for the next episode of Emergency Cooking. Thank you.
Can't wait to see what else you got up your sleeve.
Oh, I've got something for you. Bye, guys.